Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to show you a little bit on how I created this clutch pedal. This is a generatively designed clutch pedal for a BMW. Factory pin, so this is going to slide in and then it clips in really satisfyingly. And I'm going to talk about some of the generative stuff going on here, and I can also show you the differences between these two and why one has clearance and why one doesn't. I'm going to show you this later on in the video, but first I have something almost as cool, potentially cooler, more of a sellable product, that's for sure. This is a Camber eccentric replacement plate for a Corvette, C5, C6, and C7. I was able to get this not only be mirrored, flippable, so that the same part can be used in both directions, but the adjustment that you're able to do is with the set screw through this hole, we're going to adjust its position. So this is going to be able to be done on a car, cracking the bolt loose, and I'll show you how that's done on the computer here. You can see that this is turning the set screw as we adjust it. That's really how it's going to work. Now, there are kits available for the Corvettes that lock out the camber. We've been selling a kit for 6 years that locks out the camber. It's a stainless steel washer. You can put it in 3 different positions and it does essentially the same thing, but can't adjust on the car. It's no good for fine tuning, and it's really only if you have adjustable control arms like we do for drifting and we just want to lock it out. We don't really care if we can adjust it. Whereas road racing, to pair up with our road racing control arms, which I will open, these are non-adjustable control arms. So they have a uniball on both ends with a ball joint on the outer. So there is no adjustment in these control arms. It's specifically designed to be longer than factory. So our starting base point is 15 millimeters longer than the stock lower control arm, so that we basically are able to get the camber that we want. It's stiffer, it has uniballs, it's made from chromoly tubing. So that is the road racing control arm that we're going to be coming out with, and it has the factory T-bar style mounts. This one was definitely a fun one to design, but I guess we'll show more about that on the next video. This one is really what we're showcasing, and we're going to have these finished machining for the first prototype probably in the next week or so after they get plated. The other thing was I wanted to have these marks show up on the actual machined part. So we're going to machine the lines and then we're going to fill them with an ink so that they're going to show up. This is going to be zinc plated. This is going to be electro plated, which will be black. And then these lines will be white. And then this line machined, you should just be able to see that. So we're going to be able to just use this as a reference from left to right, front to back. We'll be able to see how these line up and standardize the process. One of the cooler things that I had to do though was bring in all of the subframes from these cars. So the first and probably the most common comparison that we could do, what are the differences between a C5 and a C6 subframe? Let's look at those first. Right off the bat, we're going to notice the mounting locations are different. Now, I particularly lined up the control arm mounts because that's what I'm making these products for. So I essentially overlapped the control arm mounting points. So using that as our base reference, we can see all of the major differences. At first glance, and if they were apart from each other, they look quite similar, but we can already see that the C5 subframe, the steering rack is a decent amount further back. The mounting points of the subframe are further forward. So the subframe is actually creating quite a large difference between the two on 2 very critical mounting positions, but the control arm mounting positions, width and length, are identical. If you swapped these subframes, you may actually be able to achieve or negate some benefits. Now, one thing to note, the C5 subframe having the steering rack further back is actually better for drifting. The steering rack position on a C6 is way too far forward. So if you have a C5, your steering rack's already in a better position. Could you run this on a C6? I don't know. I'd have to put it all together to see, because that would likely put the rack right into the balancer of the engine on the C6. So the C5 must be running something different with the engine setup as well. We can also see things that we don't really care about that much. The motor mounts are different by quite a bit. And then the structure of itself, the C5 is definitely just older technology and has more material in more places because it's an older subframe and they didn't have the same technology. Going to the C6. So let's hide the C5 and we're now going to go to the C6 subframe and we're going to compare that with the C5. We're not going to compare a C7 to a C5 because the correlation's too broken. So a C6, this is really where technology and design, manufacturing really took a large leap in GM. 5 and 6, very similar. 6 and 7, totally different. Did I say something wrong?
Yeah, 6, 7.
6, 7. Okay, so massive difference. And I actually weighed this subframe when Tommy Lemaire was here. If I recall correctly, it was approximately 7 to 8 pounds lighter than the C6 subframe. And once again, I lined up the suspension mounts, and once again, they are pretty much identical. The C7 actually had a shorter range of eccentric. So the C6 has about 20 millimeters, which is a very long slot. And then the C7 has about a 17, 18-ish millimeter slot. The mounting points are totally different in completely different spaces. The steering rack is very similarly placed. The C7 it's single shear instead of double shear. So it bolts to the subframe with a lot more material kind of built into the motor mount right through there, and then the same thing on the other side, whereas a C6 is double shear tabs that the rack sits in. And I've actually seen, I believe Matt Field either broke the ones off the subframe or he broke them off of his rack. But we do make a steering rack brace, and that actually goes on here on the outside of the subframe. And then the subframes also, C6, Z06 are different as well. It's made from magnesium, so the mounts and other things are quite a bit thicker, but the subframe overall is lighter. So that's another cool fact. So that's just really interesting. I mean, you could look at this all day and find all the differences, but the biggest one being C7 really took a leap on the manufacturing processing, got a lot of weight and probably added a lot of rigidity when they went to this design. Back to our kit here. Now we're gonna test this first, obviously, but this is gonna be really great for the road race stuff because the current products on the market that do the lockout are shaped like a hexagon, or they have flat sides that you can rotate. Basically, the issue with that is you would need to loosen the bolt off enough that the hex can miss the ears, rotate it, and then put it back on. So to do this on an alignment rack, definitely a huge pain. This one, you would barely have to break the bolt free, and then you could do your adjustment easily on the rack. If you're spending 2 hours on an alignment rack, but you saved $50 on the product, you overpaid for the product. The alignment is going to cost you more than the product cost itself. So if we're going in the direction of making products easier, more time friendly, but just as reliable and good, this is definitely going to be the product. You're going to save a ton of time. We're using chromoly for everything. We're not going with aluminum or anything. I think these bolts being torqued down to like 140 foot-pounds, there's just no place for aluminum. Our other lockout plates are stainless steel. And I think if you just start using these things enough, you're going to need to use good materials. So that's what we're making that of. Let's go over to the generative design stuff. There's a lot of time into this, so we're going to give you a nice, good overview of it, but not go too much into detail. So one of the coolest things that we're going to start with is you're designing something generatively. What do you want it to do? The answer is, in this case, replace the stock plastic clutch pedal on a BMW. There are already options for this. People make billet ones already. So the first thing I did, model this pedal in a file. I created a clutch pedal that resembled the OEM one. The scan is here. This is what I based it off of. So I basically made a direct replacement of the scan as a solid body. That's step one. Step two would be determining the objectives, the use case. What do we want this pedal to do? We want it to be stronger, stiffer, lighter. What do you want it to do? You need to understand what the objective is. So that, for me, would be weight, minimal, stiffness, maximum, stronger as well. These break and bend and flex. And they actually flex so much that when I push it in the wagon, it would just push over and miss the clutch stop and then get stuck on the clutch stop. So it was like a double whammy. So we widened our clutch stop with a welded plate so that it can hit it even if it's bending like an inch over. So stiffness for me was like maximum priority. So let's go to the generative board and see what we needed to do to create that. Now, generative is crazy because it's going to take the path of least resistance to come up with the best design possible to fit your objectives. Now, I have load cases, which tells it how much force it needs to be able to handle. I have material specifications, and I have avoidance regions, or in this case, they're called obstacle geometry. I'm gonna show those here in red. So the red is all of the things that I'm telling the generative design to not go near. Don't go here. That's what the red is. So you can see how the red, you don't always have to do this, but specifically speaking, there's so many little things under the dashboard for the pedal that I can't go near. I had to do it in this case. You don't usually have to do a giant shell around the object you're creating, but I did in this case. And then I usually just hide it because it just is in the way. All of these other things are avoidance regions. If I didn't put a pin through the hole, it would fill the hole with material to make it stronger. I had to kind of build this one out because it kept trying to create the generative design through here. And same thing goes for all this. The green is our preserved geometry. So this is going to be everything that we need to maintain, and the AI generator is going to connect all of those together. Then the yellow is my starting shape. I'm basically giving the computer, this is kind of what I want it to look like, and follow this path. It doesn't follow the path perfectly. That's why this one added this giant rib here. Even though I said for it to go around like this, it said, well, I can make it stronger if I put a rib here. So then I had to modify my obstacle geometry so that I made it go around. And after you set all of that up, the load cases are always interesting as well. I have a load case applying a force here on the spring, foot, side load, and I have pinned constraints. So we have constraints and we have structural loads. Those are the two main things when setting up a generative design. The constraints can be anything that's fixed, pinned, frictionless, or remote. So in this case, I have 2 pivot points with a force applied at the pedal. So most of my load cases have those 2 pins, and I'm applying forces in different directions while those are pinned. There was one case where I added a pin on the foot pedal and on the main pivot with a 500-pound force pushing. I just wanted to make sure I isolated the slave cylinder and applied a force independently so that the case knows there might be an incident where the cylinder, the master cylinder, is pushing here, I'm pinned here, and I have this thing bottomed out. There's going to be a force applied here. It's not going to be anywhere near 500 pounds. I can almost guarantee that, but I needed to make sure that it was there. The next ones are just more load cases that I think need to be separate and at different times. So if I apply a load with my foot and on the side, that's one load case, but I might only have a side load, and then I might only have a pressure load for my foot. And that's really what starts happening with all of these extra ribs. So every one of these ribs, if I showed you the first design I came up with, none of these were here, and then I applied a side load case, and then it added this rib. And then I applied, a different load case, and then it added this rib. And then I gave it an avoidance region here, and it changed from this one, which has a giant hole here and a support, and it closed off the hole and then removed the support to give myself clearance. But then it did other things. It made it thicker here than this one because the load case remained the same, but I said you have to avoid this area. And it says I got to compute a solution to this. The overall weight for this is going to be under a pound, made from aluminum. And if we go to the design side now, we have put in place the pedal. And this is kind of what it looks like. So this is what Fusion's generative design came up with, and this is exactly what I printed here. And it's really, really cool. So I can even edit this stuff if I go into my forms, because it generates a giant organic form, and I can actually click and move these if I edit or modify the form. So this is quite intrusive if you start messing with stuff like this, but you can actually edit the form to have clearances if you needed them without disrupting the main preserved geometry. So for an example, if I put my cylinder in here and the little push rod hits some material, I could go to my edit form and I could move some of the material out of the way. Whereas if this is a solid body, you have to you have to cut it out of the way or extrude it out of the way. So using forms more and more often is it's organic. It's very interesting to mess with. This really is what I would consider to be the future for designing and working with AI. It is only as good as your inputs. So you, the person, the operator, still needs to be really, really smart on how you use it. It's a tool. Messing around with it quite a bit. We are going to print one of these out of metal once I verify the fitment. I'll probably print like a PPS CF pedal that, could probably get close to this, just to make sure it actually goes on the car and it actually pushes in the clutch, make sure all clearances are good, it all feels great. I may form in here a threaded bump stop that'll be part of the generative design so that we can just add a clutch stop on it, and it'll all print at once. Probably the only operation we'll need to do is the thread, and then we're gonna run it on our car. And from that, and this might be a year from now, we're going to be able to then further our development on using things like this. I think a handbrake would also be really cool, generatively designed, especially if it was the basket and the handbrake. You bring the Willwood master in, or whichever master you're using, you create that as an avoidance region, do all the preserved geometry stuff. It's, you could make it really, really cool and have this organic looking handle that you're pulling on. And the coolest part is it's 3D printed. If you needed a new one, you just print another one. And the cost of a prototype is oftentimes close to or the same as the production run, because I'm using a pound of material regardless. Whereas in machining, I need a giant blank of billet aluminum to machine away the final product. And that operation is done better in a production volume state, because you can set up the mill once, set up your fixture table, mill all of them potentially out of one giant plate and get more yield out of it. But 3D printing is 3D printing. It's just you're printing one and then it's done. And you used 1 pound of material and that's all you used. You clear it off, you print another one. Once additive manufacturing gets better, this is going to become the future. Next, we're going to be doing more legend stuff. We're competing next week. We're slammed all of next week, but we're going to keep you guys updated with everything. Oh, one other thing. I did a 5-part YouTube series on Fusion 360. We're putting the videos on Fusion's YouTube channel and on our channel. This is going to be a all-in-one how to work with 3D scans and mesh files within Fusion. It's what I've been preaching and teaching. You guys are going to get it basically for free on YouTube, and we're going to keep pushing the envelope on where we can go with this stuff. So you guys will see me there too in a couple of weeks, and you're going to get access to some of the files that I used in the video, including the scan files and some of our FDF products and parts from our catalog. You'll actually get to have them, download them, and use them within Fusion so that you can do exactly what I did in the same way and follow along. So that'll be really cool. See you guys in the next one.